Hey there! Thank you for tuning into Duck Bricks, and today is August 10, 2021, which means it's a very special day. This is officially Bionicle Day, and it's also Bionicle's 20th anniversary since it first launched in 2001. And so for this very special event, I am showcasing my entire LEGO Bionicle collection. This includes every single set that was ever released for Bionicle from 2001 all the way down to 2016 for G2. And it also includes every single Canon combiner model. So you can see many rows of combiner models all around me. There is a ton to cover, so I hope you enjoy and we can jump right in right now. Alright, so here we are at the entrance to my LEGO collection. Now, some of you may have seen this, but I did do a completely separate video. It's quite a long video showcasing every single Bionicle Kanohi mask, helmet, head, you name it. If it was featured on the face of a Bionicle, it probably was covered in that video, and in that video I explained what every single one of these masks does and their powers and relevance in universe. So if you are interested in something like that, definitely go check that out. I'm just going to go through them very quickly here so you can see some of the masks throughout every single year of Bionicle, some Krana down the side here, some of the 08 masks, and one of the newest additions to my collection since that video. Besides these mosaics here, you can see I finally have gotten the Pearl Gold Kanohi Krakon, or the Mask of Shadows. Actually, a fan of the channel reached out who had it for sale, so thank you so much for that, and I'm really happy to finally have the complete collection of every single Bionicle mask. You can see it includes the misprints as well, with the red, blue, green, white, brown, and black masks over there, as well as one of the rarest Bionicle masks ever in the Golden Kanohi Ignika, or Mask of Life. Moving on here, you can see some specialized G2 masks from the 2015 to 2016 run of Bionicle, plus some Visorak shells and Vaki heads, and some customized Chrome Gold Bionicle masks, which I also highlighted in a separate video. They are customized from Chrome Block City if you do want to check out that video and see what that's all about. Now alongside here I have custom Bionicle mosaics in the same style as the LEGO Art mosaics. Specifically, we have the Great Spirit Robot, the 6 Toamata, as well as a Kanohi and Krana, plus a map of the island of Mana Nui. But with that covered, let's dive right into the massive LEGO collection. You can see LEGO all around the walls around me and hanging from the ceiling. But of course, our main focus today are the construction figures. Now, before we want to get into Bionicle, I do want to very quickly mention just one other thing. I do have some other construction figures on these shelves here. You can kind of see some of the Star Wars figures right there. But of course, the main attraction are every single Bionicle model here, which we just showed at the beginning of the video, featuring all of the official sets, plus every combiner model. So over here, you can see it's stretching from 2001 to 2016. Alright, so zooming in here, you can see I've split up the collection in different categories. So this column right here is primarily focused on the canister-sized heroes as well as the smaller characters. So this includes the Toa, Glatorian, as well as the Matoran, Agori, and Turaga, which were the smaller size sets. So typically, many of the taller heroes in the back were the ones sold in the $10 to $15 canisters, and the ones up at the front were relatively cheaper, smaller offerings for the other smaller characters of the years. Moving on down here, you can see it covers pretty much every year of Bionicle. We've got combiner models here, but we'll talk about those in a second. And the final two rows here are the entirety of the Bionicle Generation 2 Storylines characters. I've included a few custom characters of my own, as well as the modified versions of every single one of these sets. I've actually modded most of the G2 characters, so you can see them all right here, and even including the massive Makuta model, which the instructions were never officially released for, but we actually saw a glimpse of this character in the final episodes of Journey to 1, and he's using the Mask of Ultimate Power, which I purchased from Shapeways. Moving on, and we'll take a look at all of these individually in a little bit. I've got some of the larger models here, or what Bionicle likes to call the Titans, or Rahi in this case. We've got the 2001 to 2002 larger characters. Some of it spills over to here for that particular year, but for the most part, we've got basically a lot of the Titans and large characters here. Moving on to 04 to 05, and then we have the years of 2006 to 2007 kind of just spread across this category. And finally, we have 2008 and 2009 all alongside here for the Titans. Now, of course, down here we have another row just full of combiner models, which we'll take a look at later. And then I have stuff that isn't Bionicle. These are Hero Factory sets, which were Bionicle's successor. And you can see Hero Factory and other construction, which is construction and action figure buildable figures, continue on to here, like all the Ben 10 sets and all these superhero buildable figure sets as well. Of course, as I showed earlier in the video, some of the other buildable characters, namely the ones from the Star Wars universe, are on these shelves over here just because I didn't manage to fit every single one of the construction figures there. Down here I've also got all of the Chima figures, including pretty much every single combo model, and all of the Knights Kingdom figures I own. I think I'm still missing around 2 to 3, you can see it's pretty tightly packed there, but that's pretty much where it is for construction. Going on back here, you can see some of the early precursors to Bionicle, the Throwbots and Robo-Riders. I do own every single one, as well as Galador, which I of course had to include here. Now this row is all combo models as well, but then up here you can see I've tried to dedicate this space to mainly the villains, all except for some other titans which spilled over to the frontier from 02 and 03, namely the Takanuva sets, Jaller and Puku and Gakko and whatnot, so we've got some of the heroes here, but for the most part, this column here is mainly focused on the smaller canister-sized villain sets, and you can see that they're all kind of laid out here. Again, we've kind of got an exception with some extra spillover vehicles from 2009 being included here, as well as the final wave of Bionicle sets, the Stars from 2010. And lastly, there is one exception to this. I did also include the Makuta from the 2008 storyline alongside the Toa here, mostly because they were canister-sized characters that went well together. And unlike the previous years, which featured 2 different iterations of the Toa, for example, these are the same characters, these are the same characters, and they're the same characters, they didn't really do that for 2008. We just had 1 year of heroes and villains, so I decided to put the entire wave on the shelf. But with that, let's kickstart things right now by starting off with the year of 2001, where it all began on the island of Mata Nui. Okay, so here I'm featuring the Toa Mata, the Toa Nuva, as well as the Matoran of Mata Nui, plus the Turaga. So, starting off here with a very, very brief story explanation for these. The Bionicle story started off when the Matoran, which are the villagers, these smaller characters here, which you could have bought from McDonald's Happy Meal toys, by the way, as well as the Turaga, the village elders, so you can see a Turaga here, as well as here and so on, they were basically under attack by the Rahi beasts, which were large animal-like creatures that were both biomechanical and slightly robotic. These were the main villains of 2001. The Rahi beasts were being controlled by a being known as Makuta, and that's where the Toa come in. The Toa, or the heroes, basically come in and save the day in a very, very simplified version of the story. Over the course of the journey and the several years of the Bionicle theme, they upgraded themselves. You can see Tahu Mata from 2001 there, standing next to Tahu Nuva from 2003, which they were upgraded when they were submerged in energized protodermis following the events of the 2002 storyline. And back here you can see the main heroes of Bionicle, Onua, Pohatu, Kopaka, Liwa, Gali, and Tahu, all in the back there, as well as the large cast of Matoran and Turaga elders from throughout the first 3 years of Bionicle. Just a note here, I'm actually using a custom resin cast mask for this character here, just because I thought it looked cool, but of course that's not something from the official sets. Moving on to the rest of 2001, you can see, as I was mentioning, the mighty Rahi like the Tarakava, Nui Jaga, the Muaka and Kane Ra, with some Nui Rama on top of them, and the Manas, which are pretty notable because they are remote controlled and fully motorized, which make for really fun toys. I've also included some of the different build options for the Bionicle Master Builder Kit, where essentially you were given a ton of pieces and were told to build your own Rahi from it. Although I do have these kind of scattered across different displays, so here's just a small sampling of what they are, including the 2001 depiction of an Ussel Crab, the very cute Fiku Spider, and some of the native creatures to Powahi. Up here we have the Barog Queens. So these were released in 2002. They were the queens of the Borak Swarms, which we're about to see right here. Now the Borak Swarms were the enemy for 2002. They actually are a crucial part of Mata Nui's life cycle. In essence, their entire purpose is to cleanse the island of Mata Nui and remove everything off of it, in order to wipe the surface clean for the eventual reawakening of Mata Nui himself. But of course, they were awakened early by Makuta, so you can see them here. Now we have the regular Borak alongside the Borak Call, which were individual upgraded versions of the Borak. Now just a bit of backstory here, the Borak toys in 2002 were so popular that they really outsold pretty much every other LEGO product that year, and so in 2003, LEGO decided to do it again, but in silver. But as you can probably expect, people were wanting something new, so the Borak Call did not sell too well. Now behind the Borak Call you can see the dreaded Rakshi, servants of the evil Makuta. These can be created by any Makuta using Krata worms. They're actually housed inside the spines of the Rakshi, and they were some of the first Bionicle characters to actually feature full-on knee articulation, which was pretty crazy back then. Now, of course, over here we have some extra spillover Titans. We have an Exo-Toa, which is a robotic exosuit. It can be piloted by an advanced AI or actually worn by a Toa themselves, which the Toa Mata wore when they ventured into the Borak hives. Down here we have Nuparu. He is an inventor Matoran, and he has his contraption which he built out of destroyed Borak pieces, the Boxor, which he uses to fight Borak. Now Nuparu actually becomes a main character later on in the story because he becomes a Toa himself, which we'll get to in a little bit. But of course, how could I not mention Takua? So Takua was the Av Matoran who didn't realize he was a Matoran of light. He thought he was a Ta Matoran or Matoran of fire, eventually transforming into the powerful Takanuva, Toa of light. And you can see the vehicle he rides up there, the Asanui. Down here are some other animals that came packaged with Jaller and Takua. Takua specifically had his Ussel Crab Puku, which is much larger than the original 2001 Ussel Crab. And Jaller also had a Gecko bird to fly, especially during the events of the Mask of Light film, when Jaller used the bird to fly up high in the sky towards Kauai. But moving on from 01 to 03, it's time to turn our attention to 2004 to 2005. Now these were flashback years. They took place back when the Turaga, or the village elders, you can see Nokama right here, was a hero. So the Turaga used to be heroes, Toa of their own, defending the city of Metru Nui before the Great Cataclysm, which is when Makuta took over the Great Spirit Robot's body. Now, starting off here, we have Toa Vakama, Toa Nokama, Toa Matau, Toa Nuju, Toa Onua, and Toa Wenua, which all correspond to their corresponding Turaga. So you can see Turaga Wenua here, and Toa Wenua. Turaga Nuju here, Toa Nuju, and so on. Up the frontier, you have the Matoran of Metru Nui alongside each of the Rahaga. Now, the Rahaga were actually a group of Toa heroes themselves called the Toa Haga way back in the day. You can see some of them were special limited edition sets right here, specifically Toa Norik and Toa Iruni, but unfortunately they were transformed into small, shrunken creatures by this villain right here, Rudaka, and we'll get to that in a second. So back here you can also see I have the 2005 Toa Hordika forms. These were after the Toa Metru were mutated by Visorak venom and transformed into monstrous versions of themselves. Now specifically, these were the next iteration of Toa heroes from 2005, and the Toa Hordika were paired with the Rahaga, whereas the Toa Metru came out at the same time as the Matoran of Metru Nui. Moving on to the Titans and larger builds from 2004 to 2005. First off, we have Toa Likan and Kikanalo. Kikanalo is just a Rahi beast, but Toa Likan is a pretty important character. He was one of the original Toa protecting Metru Nui before he gave up his Toa power to transform the Toa Metru into 6 new heroes. In the background there you have Nivok, a spy bird, a large bird-like creature commanded by Turaga Duma, who in fact, if the name wasn't enough to suggest, is secretly evil, and actually is Makuta Pterodax in disguise. The real Turaga Duma was imprisoned by Makuta Pterodax, and he's actually a good character. It's just this version of him who's evil. Now, Toa Likan transformed into Turaga Likan here. This particular build for Turaga Likan didn't actually come out until much later in 2006, and actually, it was a free promotion included with Duracell batteries of all things. Eventually, though, it got fully canonized by the writer of the Bionicle story after fans were actually hoping he would canonize the model as the official build for Turaga Likan. So, you can see him right there, right next to his Toa form. Back here we have two Dark Hunters, members of a bounty hunting organization, Nadiki and Kreka right there, although unfortunately they pass away during the events of the 2004 storyline, absorbed by the evil Makuta. Moving on to here, we have some of the 2005 Titans. Kitangu is a legendary Raki who aided the Toa in their quest against the Visorak spiders, and Sidorak and Rudaka were the king and queen of the Visorak horde, commanding these spider-like legions. Rudaka, of course, has been secretly working for Makuta Pterodax and backstabbed Sidorak so she could actually save Makuta Pterodax herself. And moving on here, we have the villains from 2004 and 2005. So over here in the back we have the Vaki. So the Vaki are the robotic police force employed by the evil Makuta Pterodax in the disguise of Turaga Duma over the course of the 2004 storyline, which featured a very dystopian city and the Vaki enforcing the law and will of the evil Makuta Pterodax throughout the city. Down here we have the Visorak spiders, another horde enemy for the Toa to face. These were the Stealers of Life and Scourge of Darkness, and their venom transformed the Toa Metru into the Toa Hordika. Moving on from here, we have the heroes from 2006 and 2007. Now, over the course of very daring journeys, some of the Matoran characters from 2001, like Jaller here, were transformed into Toa and Nika, lightning-infused Toa on a quest to reawaken Matanui and save him from death. First off, we have Toa Jaller, Holly, Kongu, Matoro, Huki, and Nuparu. And up front, we have different Matoran from this era of Bionicle, namely the Matoran of Voyanui, as well as some of the Matoran of Marinui. We also have some Hydruka creatures up at the frontier, which are used underwater to farm airweed, which we'll get to in a second. So starting off with the Toa, you can see that we have the Toa after they were transformed into Toa and Nika, and then later on we have the 2007 forms of the Toa here, which were the Toa Mari, where the Mask of Life mutated the Toa and Nika to allow them to breathe underwater, and essentially be able to combat and survive in the fight for the Mari Nui underwater city. Down here, there are some important characters of note, namely Velika here is actually a great being in disguise, one of the most powerful characters in the entire Matoran universe, but this wasn't revealed until nearly 4 to 5 years after his set came out. Now over here we have the Pomatoran Dakar. Dakar was a simple hunter living underwater until the Mask of Life transformed him into the long-dead jailer of the pit, Hydraxon. He resurrected the consciousness of Hydraxon, overriding Dakar's body and turning him into this large titan. And speaking of titans, let's take a look at the large characters for the 06-07 storyline. So starting off here, we have two different versions of Vezon. Now Vezon was the Mad Paraka half-being who eventually commanded the large spider Fenrak, but of course he was upgraded from Vezon and Fenrak to Vezon and Cardass. Now the Cardass dragon here is a mutation of the Fenrak spider, a much larger version, which is why they look very similar, but this one of course is much more monstrous. Now actually a fun fact about this model is that the Cardass dragon is actually a combiner model, featuring Vezon and Fenrak, Axon over here, and Brutaka in the back. But of course, since it was released as a regular retail set, I decided to display Cardass right with the other Titans without actually separating him and including him with some of the other combo models down there. Now one thing you may notice here is that this is decidedly not an official Bionicle set. This is just a custom Vezon that I created about 5-6 years ago because honestly, the two versions of Vezon that came in the Vezon and Fenrak set versus the Vezon and Cardass set were very, very similar. So I decided to do something a little bit more unique with my other version of Vezon, kind of making a CCBS version. All credit for the head technique goes to some images I found online and had to reverse engineer. I definitely did not come up with this very unique design featuring brick-built teeth and glowing eyes. Moving on, we have some members of the Order of Matanui, a secret organization working from the shadows to enact the will of the Great Spirit himself. This is Axon, loyal servant of the Order of Matanui, and his old friend Brutaka is in the back, who betrayed the Order of Matanui to seek out his own destiny. Moving onwards, we have a protector of the Mask of Life, servant of the Order of Matanui, Umbra right here, who actually is a pretty interesting design featuring essentially roller skates for his feet. And then we have over here the Urnak beast. So this Urnak creature was one of the Paraka's most dreaded nightmares. He doesn't actually exist, but he was a legend in Paraka's Skakti mythology. Essentially, he was a being that would come kind of like the boogeyman and feed on you if you were to act out or misbehave. However, Urnak here was essentially materialized into being in the Zone of Nightmares, in one of the many tests that Paraka faced to claim the Mask of Life. In the back here, we start to move on to 2007 stuff. Nocturne is the brutish enforcer of the Baraki, who we'll meet in a second, as well as Gadunka here, who was once a small plankton, now enlarged by the Mask of Life. Now Maxilos over here is a thoughtless, unfeeling robot, but possessed by the spirit of Makuta Pterodax, making him secretly Makuta in disguise. We already covered Hydraxon here, and finally we have the Mad Titan Karzani. Karzani was the ruler of his own realm, which was essentially the equivalent of hell in the Bionicle universe, until eventually he delved deep underwater and was mutated into this gruesome creature. Finally, we have Toa Lesovic, leader of the first Toa team, who unfortunately lost all of his team members in a tragic accident where he was a little bit too late and all his team members died. So he essentially was the final surviving member of his team. You can see his sea sled right here, which he uses to go around with underwater. And he eventually had to seek redemption in the form of attacking and imprisoning Karzani with the Order of Matanui to redeem himself. Moving on from these titans, it's time we take a look at some of the villains for the 06 and 07 storyline. On the side right here, we have the Paraka, a gang of Skakti thugs who are unknowingly influenced by Makuta Pterodax to actually seize the Mask of Life for themselves. You can see that Paraka featured some pretty fun details, including a rubberized spine, glow-in-the-dark teeth, and eyes that really light up, as well as Zamrosphere launchers to enslave the Matoran population. Over here we have the Deep Sea Baraki from 2007. The Baraki were a race of exiled warlords. They used to be rulers of the League of Six Kingdoms thousands of millennia ago, until they were imprisoned by the pit by Botar and the Order of Matanui. Now Takadox over here actually betrayed his fellow Baraki, so the Baraki didn't realize one among them betrayed them until much, much later, and it was this devious fellow right here who did the deed. Moving on, we can take a look at the 2008 storyline. Now, the 2008 storyline returned to the Toa Nuva, which we last saw in 2003 in set form, and brought them to the swamps of Kardanui and the skies of the heart of the universe, fighting to save Matanui's life. Right here we have the Toa Nuva featuring adaptive armor, which transformed to adapt to their surroundings, which unfortunately made them pretty distinct and not really look like their original Toa Nuva counterparts, but you can see that they made for some pretty unique and dynamic toys. Accompanying the Toa here are some of the villains from 2008. These were members of the Brotherhood of Makuta. Now, they were sent as a strike force to delay the Toa from awakening Matanui and essentially trick them in a fake fight to make them believe that they were succeeding in awakening Matanui, but secretly, that was what Makuta wanted all along. Now, every single one of these Makuta were vaporized in the energy storm after being tricked by the main big bad Makuta Pterodax to stay in Kardanui while the energy storms broke out. In the front here, we have the Matoran and Shadow Matoran. Now you can see each of the Makuta has these Tridax pods in their chests. They release these vicious Shadow Leeches, which are rubberized creatures that drain the light from Matoran. So some of these Matoran are once Av Matoran, now Shadow Matoran, as well as some of the heroic Av Matoran still fighting to save their friends and revert them back to the light. Now, before we move on to the titans of the story, because I do have them on the same shelf as the 2009 characters, let's just briefly look at the 2009 buildable characters here. First off, we transported ourselves to a completely different planet, Bara Magna, where multiple events were taking place outside of the Matoran universe, featuring the Glatorian warriors and Agori villagers. These warriors faced each other in gladiator matches across the planet of Bara Magna, claiming victory for themselves and their tribes. Now over here we have Matanui himself. This was after the events of the 2008 storyline, when the Mask of Life was ejected from the Matoran universe and made himself a Toa-sized body on the sands of Bara Magna. Moving on to the titans of this era, you can see Toa Takanuva, once the Toa of Light, now a Toa of Light and Shadow, after having his light partially drained by Makuta Icarax's Shadow Leeches here. You can see Takanuva was greatly enlarged by his presence in the swamps of Kardanui, which fueled his energies as a Toa of Light and Shadow. Over here, we have Toa Ignika. Toa Ignika was the form that the Mask of Life built for itself in order to fight alongside the Toa heroes, after being inspired by Matoro's sacrifice to save Matanui. Down here, you'll barely see it, but we have the Rahi Clack, which has the very powerful ability to actually heal anyone transformed by a Shadow Leech. Up in the back here, we have Mazika, a devout member of the Order of Matanui with a vendetta against another Matoran, the Ta Matoran Voltraz. Here's the evil Ta Matoran Voltraz, now a Shadow Matoran, who has a rivalry with Mazika here, featuring a very cool Swamp Strider with a triple cannon. Over here, we have the scientist Makuta Mutron and his research assistant Vikon, and then we can move on to some of the 2009 stuff. Over here is the fantastic Toa Matanui. This actually never appeared within the official Bionicle storyline, but it was essentially a Titan form of Matanui. This mask in particular is one of the rarest canon Bionicle masks because it really only appeared in this large set and is a very, very important piece to the universe. Over here we have the largest Bionicle set ever, the Scopio model. This essentially is just a large Technic model. It's a scorpion that converts into a vehicle, and you can see it's piloted by an Iron Agori here, a member of the Iron Tribe. And down here we have some other vehicles that the Agori piloted throughout their battles in Bara Magna. You can see some more vehicles right here. And the vehicles continue onwards to this section over here with the disgraced Iron Agori Samad piloting his vehicle, as well as some other vehicles that appeared throughout the 2009 storyline. Now over here we have the Bionicle Stars, the 2010 wave of Bionicle, the final wave, which featured Tahu yet again in two forms. You could have him in his golden powered up armor form by collecting all the sets, or you could just have him in the standard form. It also included Takanuva, Gresh, a Paraka, specifically Nektan in the back, as well as one of these Skrull warriors. But before we move on from this era of Bionicle, I do have to mention we have a few more things up here, specifically the battle vehicles. These were large vehicles the Toa piloted into battle, Oxalara T9, Rocco T3, and Jetrax T6, fighting against the Makuta in the skies of Karda Nui and accompanied by Toa Ignika himself. But then we can move on to some of the combo models. So this shelf right here features pretty much every single canon combo model from 2001 to 2003, save for a few that are either currently in construction or under repair, or one that's up on the shelf here. Many of these are canon models that did appear in the story and featured alternate builds to some of the official sets, or were just some models on their own, like the Turaga Nui here, which was a combination of all the Turaga, and the Toa's powerful Kaita combiner forms here, featuring Toa Kaita Akamai and Toa Kaita Warua. On the back here, you can see each of the Toa Nuva Kaita. They did a slightly different build for one of them right here, featuring a smaller appearance but more bulkier on the body, as well as one kind of standard one. And even the Borak could form Kaita as well, with the Borak here and the Borak Call all forming Kaitas of their own. On the side here, we have some Rakshi builds. The Rakshi themselves could form their own Kaita as well, and you can even see Takuta Nuva in the back there, which was a combination of Makuta Pterodax and Toa Takanuva. Now over here, this is the only non-canon combiner model. It was a combiner model packaged with Japanese retail promotions, and I just thought it looked cool. So I thought that this was a pretty cool looking build for the Rakshi combiner, so I decided to actually just have him as my own model right here. Moving on from there, though, we can take a look at the 2004 to 2005 combiner models. Now over here we have Ultimate Duma. This was the form that Makuta Pterodax took after absorbing Nadiki, Kreka, and of course Nivok as well, and it actually makes a lot of sense because in universe, this is actually the combiner model for all of those builds. You can see Makuta's great shadow hand reaching outwards right here, which does look pretty fun as a build on its own. In the back here, we have the Kraka Rahi, who is a shape-shifting Rahi deep within the archives who battled with the Toa Metru until eventually learning to work with them and reappearing in the story at different points. Down here we have some other combiners, mainly Rahi and other Vaki experiments, so different special enforcer types of Vaki, some prototype Vaki in the back there, as well as just some other Rahi made of the different Matoran from the universe. I especially love the building technique used on this Rahi right here, using the mask of Toa Hordika Wenua backwards and the axle slot as the eyeball there. A super inventive build. Now we have a ton of Visorak combiner models here like the Kagarak, as well as the Great Zevon, who was a massive, monstrous beast who came from a dark dimension to consume all in its path. And there are still some more 2005 and 2004 combiner models over here. Specifically, we have the Shadowed One, leader of the Dark Hunters, as well as the time-sensitive Dark Hunter Voparak behind him, and the Dark Hunter Sentrak as well, who you can see right behind there. Moving on, we have some of the fearsome Frostalis Rahi, as well as some of the combiner models for the Rahaga, all canon characters like the Colony Drone. And even over here, we have some 2006 combo models. Botar is the teleporting servant of the Order of Madanui, who essentially served as their jailer. He teleported people and sent them to the pit prison, and also teleported members of the Order of Madanui across the universe. Over here, featuring a custom 3D printed mask, we have Toa Jovan. Toa Jovan sent his team down into the 777 stairs to resurrect Madanui, and after one of his team members sacrificed themselves, Toa Jovan, the Toa of Magnetism, and eventually became a Turaga on the island of Voyanui before being killed. Over here we have some Dagger Spider Rahi, which were just some extra Matoran builds that were combo models. And back here we have the Protodax creatures, which were an enlarged version of Zaktan's Protodites, as well as one of the Zyglak creatures, leftovers from the Great Being's experiments, who once again returned to wreak havoc in this land. Over here we have the armored Manutri penguins, which Karzani outfitted for war, as well as some of the pit war tortoises, which Karapar used to ride into battle. Moving on to here, we have some of the final combiner models of Bionicle's multi-year run. We have the Trinuma warrior in the back, member of the Order of Madanui, some Niazesk in the back there, the Swamp Strider, some Sandstalkers, and all the way in the back we have Makuta Spiria as well. Now this monstrosity right here was a being that was a combiner model of all of the Bionicle stars, and we're going to touch on him in these story reviews when we get to his point in the story later on in Bionicle Retold. But moving on from that, we have basically summarized every single Bionicle G1 model that was an official set in the story. Now there are a few things that I didn't mention or might be missing from these shelves in particular. Some of the 2001 Rahi are actually in the process of being reviewed, so I have them in my separate review studio, but for the most part, this is pretty much every single Bionicle set from Generation 1. But before we move on from Generation 1 and take a closer look at G2, I have to mention some of these builds in the corner right here. So these models right here are just some of the many canon Bionicle models. These were either canonized through contests like the 2005 Dark Hunter and Rahi contests, or alternatively, they were canonized via the more modern ongoing TTV canonization contests, such as Artaka and Helrix right here. I've also included some other models that are canon that never saw the light of day, like the San Tarakava here, as well as just some other oddities that are officially all canon to the Bionicle universe, like even the Ranima, which was a LEGO Club magazine build all the way back in 2001. Starting from the bottom, we have an odd assortment of characters, namely the Tatarak Rahi, the Sandstalker Rahi, as well as some of the Dark Hunters here. We've got even more Dark Hunters up here, plus the Paraka Fusion. All the way in the back, there's like stuff like Gatherer and Tyrant, as well as the Kirakori Nui, who was another model that was inspired for Bionicle Club magazine in 2001. Moving upwards here, we have Dark Hunter Guardian, as well as one of the most impressive canon models, the Iron Wolf from the Sands of Barra Magna, the Lieutenant to the Shadowed One, Ancient right here, and moving upwards, we have the Spiny Stone Ape, Makuta Miserix, who was the original leader of the Brotherhood of Makuta, all the way in the back there. Some more Dark Hunters all along this shelf, and Rahi as well, including the Silver Shoot Spider, which I think is a pretty good build for a Bionicle character. And moving upwards, we have Artaka himself, one of the oldest and most powerful beings in the Matoran universe, as well as Wombat Combat Pictures' build of Karzani. This is officially not a canon build, but it's meant to represent the canon depiction of Karzani from his appearance in the Bionicle World Book. Back here we have the alternate dimension Makuta Pterodax of Light from the Melding Universe, which is a fantastic build, the member of the Order of Madanui Krakua here, and the leader of the Order of Madanui, Toa Helrix, the first Toa to come into existence. And all the way in the back, up at the top here, we have some of the tallest canonized models, including the largest one yet, Minion, the Dark Hunter, as well as many of the other Dark Hunters that I've reviewed in the Bionicle Fanon Reviews series. So if you want to see some of these Canon models up close, be sure to check out the Bionicle Fanon Review series, which I have releasing every single Monday. And finally, let's turn our attention here to Generation 2 of Bionicle. This was Bionicle's reboot that lasted from 2015 to 2016. Very controversial story, but everything else about it I think was really cool, right down to the designs of the characters and everything. I have a special chromed out version of Akimu right here. The Chrome Mask of Creation is actually currently sitting on my wall, so I don't have it up right now. But you can see all of the different G2 characters. I've modded basically all of them, and for some of them I actually have the original set displayed next to my modded version, so you can see some of the changes here, like beefing up the arms, making Onua a lot larger, and just making a lot of different changes. Scattered on the floor in front of them are some of the many masks from the G2 era, including this customized Mask of Creation, which is not an official LEGO product. This was actually one of the resin casts that I had ordered, which is really cool in my opinion, but of course it's not actually official LEGO. Moving on here, you can see the Toa Guardians of Okoto, as well as the Okoto villagers and elders in the front right here. I had to include a red flag behind the Villager of Ice here as a nod to the original Matoro from the Mananui Online game. But with that, after all this time, we've summed up a brief look at the entire complete Bionicle collection right here. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you see anything that's missing, or maybe have any suggestions on how to better organize this, because I tried to organize it as best I could, but eventually there are some things that kind of get buried in these scuffles. So if I missed anything, my apologies, but to my knowledge, this is pretty much the complete Bionicle collection. Now, if you're wondering about these system Bionicle sets, I do actually have them. They're not as prominently displayed, and they're kind of scattered throughout my collection, but you can see some of the 2005 Bionicle playsets here, plus 06. Down here you can see the Paraka Stronghold from 2006 as well, and I even have some of the other random stuff displayed all around, like going all the way over here. You can see some of the 2007 Bionicle playsets, specifically the Toa Terrain Crawler right there. And just one last thing. Every 2 weeks I'm releasing a new episode of Bionicle Retold, the show where I tell the entire Bionicle storyline from the beginning to the end. So in case you felt that some of the descriptions in this video were a little bit too quick and short, definitely go check out that series to see the entire Bionicle story in a digestible format. We're actually pretty close to wrapping it up at the time of this video. Just 2 more episodes and an epilogue to go, so definitely stay tuned if you're interested in stuff like that. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at every single Canon Bionicle set, combiner model, and even some of the fan-created canonized models I have on display as well. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're enjoying Bionicle Day. Thank you all for tuning into DuckBricks, and stay tuned for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. And let me know down in the comments below, which of these is your favorite model? Thanks all for tuning in, and bye-bye for now.